Wizard101 should be dead. It's an MMO from 2008. The graphics aren't exactly cutting edge. It was originally marketed towards kids, and for years, people have called it a dead game. But in 2025, something happened. The console launch. Over 1 million downloads, player queues for a game that was supposed to be dead. So how is Wizard101 still alive in 2026? I started digging into the game's history, its community, and why players keep coming back after all these years. For anyone who's never played Wizard101 before, here's the quick version. Wizard101 is a turn-based MMO that launched in 2008. Players create a wizard, choose a school of magic, collect spells, build a deck, and quest through dozens of worlds. And on paper, it's surprisingly simple. You click cards, you cast spells, and you defeat enemies. Then you move on to the next quest. But that simplicity is actually what's important. While other games spent years chasing realism, complexity, and bigger budgets, Wizard101 stayed remarkably consistent. A lot has changed over the years, but the core experience isn't that different from what players fell in love with nearly 2 decades ago. While that may sound like a weakness, it may actually be one of the biggest reasons the game still survived. The more I look deeper into Wizard101's success, the more I realize this story isn't about just a game, it was about the people who keep coming back to it. At first, you might think the answer is obvious. Nostalgia. I mean, that's the explanation everyone gives. People remember being kids.
Visit Wizard101.com.
They hear the login music. They remember their first wizard, their first mount, their first pet. And honestly, yeah, I think nostalgia plays a big role. But the more I thought about it, the less that answer made sense. Nostalgia can make somebody reinstall a game. Nostalgia can make somebody watch a YouTube video. Nostalgia can even make somebody come back for a weekend. But nostalgia alone does not keep a game alive for nearly 2 decades. Nostalgia doesn't create active communities. It doesn't create content creators. It doesn't create over 1 million console downloads. And it definitely does not create player queues. Nostalgia is clearly a part of the answer, but it was not the whole answer. Almost every Wizard101 player says the exact same thing. The more I looked into Wizard101, the more I started noticing a pattern. A lot of games measure success by how many people never leave. But Wizard101 seems to survive doing the exact opposite. Most players don't stay forever. They leave for months, sometimes for years. They come back, and once I realized that, a lot of things started making sense. Because Wizard101 isn't competing for every hour of your life. It isn't trying to become your second job. It isn't demanding that you log in every single day. Instead, it's waiting for you. And that's a very different kind of relationship. Because eventually, something reminds you of the game. Maybe it's a YouTube video, maybe it's hearing the login music again, maybe it's seeing somebody talk about it online, or maybe just one day you randomly remember it, and before you know it, you're making a new wizard. You're questing through Wizard City again, and suddenly, you're back. Not because the game forced you to come back, but because you wanted to. I think that's one of Wizard101's biggest strengths. Most games are trying to hold on to players. Wizard101 figured out how to welcome them back. And that may be one of the biggest reasons it's still here nearly 20 years later. But there is still one thing I couldn't explain. Why Wizard101? There are thousands of the games that people feel nostalgic about. Thousands of games people grew up playing, and yet somehow, Wizard101 keeps finding its way back into the conversation. I think a big part of the answer is surprisingly simple. Nobody replaced it. There are bigger MMOs. There are prettier MMOs. There are more competitive MMOs. But there aren't many games that feel like Wizard101. It's a turn-based MMO, a social game, a card game, a progression game, a collecting game, and somehow, it manages to be all those things at once, and maybe even more importantly, it's approachable. You don't need to study spreadsheets. You don't need to learn 50 systems before you can have fun. You don't need hundreds of hours before the game becomes enjoyable. You create a wizard, pick a school, cast some spells, and you're playing. And in an era where games keep becoming bigger, more complicated, and more demanding, there's something refreshing about that. Wizard101 never tried to become every other game. It stayed Wizard101. And I think that's exactly why people keep coming back. There still isn't another game quite like it. And if I needed proof that people still wanted that experience, the console launch gave me exactly that. Because for years, the internet had already made up its mind. Wizard101 was dead. Except, it wasn't. When Wizard101 launched on console in 2025, something happened that a lot of people didn't expect. People showed up, a lot of people, over 1 million downloads. And suddenly, players were waiting in queues for an MMO that launched back in 2008. Dead games don't create queues. Dead games don't get over 1 million downloads. Dead games don't attract entirely new generations of players. And that's what made the console launch so important. It wasn't just returning players, it was proof that Wizard101 still had something people wanted, even 18 years later. This is the strongest argument against the dead game narrative we've ever seen. There is still one question I couldn't stop thinking about. How does a game this old actually survive? Because keeping an online game running for nearly 2 decades is not easy. I think part of the answer comes from something most players never think about. Wizard101 never had to win the graphics race. It never needed photorealistic graphics. It doesn't need a billion polygon models, and because of that, it aged surprisingly well. Yes, they had the updated graphics come out, but my point still stands. Nobody's confusing Wizard101 for a modern AAA game, but that's kind of the point. Wizard101 was built around style, not realism. Styles tend to age better than technology. The other advantage is content. There is so much content in Wizard101, almost 2 decades of worlds. There's quests, gear, pets, housing, crafting, collecting. By this point, Wizard101 isn't just one game. It's nearly 20 years of games stacked on top of each other. And all of that gives players something most online games struggle to create, a reason to come back. So after looking at all of this, the nostalgia, the players who always come back, the fact that nobody ever really replaced Wizard101, the console launch, the years of content, the simple design, I realized something. There isn't one reason Wizard101 is still alive. It's all of them. The game itself gives a reason to stay. The community keeps the world feeling alive. It's not the biggest MMO, it never was, and it probably never will be. But I don't think that's what Wizard101 was ever trying to become. Because while most games are fighting to keep players from leaving, Wizard101 figured out how to welcome them back. And maybe that's why an MMO from 2008 is still here in 2026. Not because it was the biggest, not because it had the best graphics, not because it followed every trend, because it became something people never fully wanted to leave behind. Some games people play, some games people remember, and every once in a while, a game becomes a place where people keep coming home to. I think that's why Wizard101 is still alive.